Somewhere in the American heartland, a metal behemoth weighing nearly 200 tons thunders down a runway. 8 turbofan engines scream in unison. Halfway across the world, another giant, slimmer, younger, yet somehow older in spirit, lifts its nose skyward, a hypersonic missile slung beneath its belly like a technological sword of Damocles. One aircraft first flew when Dwight Eisenhower occupied the White House and Stalin still ruled the Kremlin. The other is a descendant of a Soviet design that Nikita Khrushchev once proudly displayed to the world. Both remain operational today in 2025. Both nations consider them essential to their strategic arsenals. This is not a story about obsolescence. This is a story about how military aviation sometimes works in reverse, where the oldest solutions become the newest platforms, where bombers designed to fight the battles of yesterday become the weapon carriers of tomorrow. Welcome to the peculiar world of the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress and the Xian H-6N, 2 aircraft that should have been museum pieces decades ago, yet somehow remain more relevant than ever. The B-52 story begins in 1948, when Boeing engineers received a specification from the United States Air Force that seems almost quaint by modern standards. The military wanted a bomber that could fly 6,000 nautical miles, carry 10,000 pounds of ordnance, and cruise at 300 knots at 40,000 feet. What Boeing delivered 4 years later was something that would outlive every single person involved in its creation. The B-52A first flew on April 15, 1952, and production continued until 1962, with 744 aircraft rolling off assembly lines in Seattle and Wichita. The final variant, the B-52H, entered service in 1961, and here we arrive at the first great paradox. The United States Air Force currently operates 76 of these H models, and plans call for them to remain in service until 2050. That means individual airframes will reach 90 years of operational life. No other military aircraft in history has achieved or is expected to achieve such longevity. The question is not merely how this is possible from an engineering standpoint, but why it remains necessary from a strategic one. The airframe itself tells a story of 1950s engineering philosophy writ large. The B-52H measures 160 feet and 11 inches from nose to tail, with a wingspan of 185 feet. The structure is primarily aluminum alloy, specifically 7075 T6 and 2024 to T3 variants, chosen for their strength-to-weight ratio and, crucially, their resistance to fatigue cracking, though we will return to that last point shortly, because it hides a decades-long engineering struggle. The aircraft employs a high-wing configuration with pronounced anhedral on the outer wing panels, a design choice that provides excellent stability but creates one of the most distinctive silhouettes in aviation history. When a B-52 sits on the ground, it appears to sag, almost weary, with its wings drooping like the shoulders of an exhausted titan. This is not aesthetic. It is the result of structural loading dynamics across a wingspan wider than the Wright brothers' entire first flight. 8 Pratt & Whitney TF-33P3 turbofan engines hang from 4 dual-pod pylons beneath those wings, each engine generating 17,000 pounds of thrust. The configuration is unusual even by the standards of 1960s design. Most large aircraft distribute engines across the wings. The B-52 clusters them in pairs, creating significant thrust asymmetry if an engine fails. The rationale was twofold: simplified maintenance access and reduced frontal area. In practice, it means that engine-out procedures in a B-52 require immediate and precise control inputs, particularly during takeoff, when asymmetric thrust can induce yaw rates that exceed the rudder authority of most pilots' initial instincts. Training manuals describe the scenario with bureaucratic understatement. Veteran pilots describe it with language not suitable for official publication. The flight deck accommodates 5 crew members, though modern operations typically use 4: pilot, co-pilot, radar navigator, and navigator. The original design included a tail gunner position, and until 1991, the B-52H retained four 12.7mm machine guns in a remotely operated tail turret. The gunner sat in a compartment near the front of the aircraft, controlling the weapons via a sophisticated, for its time, electro-optical system. These guns were removed following the Gulf War, when it became clear that modern air defense systems would destroy a B-52 long before any tailgun could engage a threat. The turret was replaced with electronic countermeasures equipment, a swap that speaks volumes about the evolution of aerial warfare. But here is where the story takes an interesting turn, one that illuminates why the B-52 survives when sleeker, more modern bombers have been retired. The United States Air Force retired the B-1B Lancer fleet from strategic nuclear service decades ago, relegating it to conventional roles and gradually reducing its numbers. The B-2 Spirit, that geometric marvel of stealth technology, numbers only 20 aircraft, costs approximately $2 billion per copy in modern accounting, and requires climate-controlled hangars and maintenance procedures so elaborate they border on ritual. The B-52, by contrast, can be serviced on an open ramp in any weather short of a hurricane. Its systems are well understood by thousands of mechanics, and its operational cost per flight hour, while substantial, is a fraction of either successor platform. More importantly, it has become what engineers call a sensor and weapons truck, a stable, long-endurance platform that can carry an ever-evolving array of standoff weapons without requiring fundamental redesign. This philosophy crystallized during the aircraft's numerous modernization programs, each bearing acronyms that only Pentagon bureaucrats could love. The Combat Network Communications Technology upgrade, completed in phases between 2012 and 2017, replaced analog systems with digital architecture, finally dragging the B-52 into the era of data links and satellite communications. The conventional rotary launcher allows the internal bomb bay to carry 20 smart weapons on a rotating carousel, a concept borrowed from Cold War nuclear loadouts, but adapted for precision-guided munitions. External hardpoints, originally designed for thermonuclear gravity bombs, now accommodate AGM-86 air-launched cruise missiles, AGM-158 joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, and even AGM-183 hypersonic test articles. The B-52 has become a flying test bed precisely because its capacious internal volume and robust wing structure can accommodate nearly anything engineers wish to bolt on. But this adaptability comes at a cost, one measured not in dollars, but in structural fatigue and engineering nightmares. Aluminum does not forget. Every flight cycle, every pressurization and depressurization, every gust encountered at altitude creates microscopic stress within the metal. Over thousands of flights, these stresses accumulate and cracks begin to propagate. The technical term is fatigue crack growth, and it is the silent enemy of every aging aircraft. The B-52 fleet has battled this enemy for decades through a program called Pacer Plank, which sounds like a fitness regimen, but is actually an exhaustive structural inspection and repair protocol. Technicians use eddy current testing, ultrasonic inspection, and computed tomography to map cracks invisible to the naked eye. Structural elements are reinforced, skin panels replaced, and load paths redistributed. Some airframes have had entire wing sections rebuilt. It is ship of Theseus problem rendered in aerospace-grade aluminum. At what point does a B-52 cease to be the aircraft that rolled off the assembly line in 1961 and become something else entirely? The Air Force does not care about the philosophical question. They care that the wings stay attached. Which brings us, inevitably, to the question of replacement. The B-52 was supposed to be replaced by the B-1 Lancer, which was itself supposed to be replaced by the B-2 Spirit, which may eventually be replaced by the B-21 Raider, a stealth bomber currently in development and shrouded in classification levels that make Cold War secrecy look transparent. Yet current planning assumes B-52s will operate alongside B-21s, providing mass and magazine depth, while the newer aircraft penetrate defended airspace. The logic is sound. Stealth platforms are exquisite tools for kicking down doors, but once air defenses are suppressed, you want cheap, reliable trucks to deliver tonnage. The B-52 is the ultimate truck, and trucks, history suggests, never go out of style. But if America's strategic bomber is a truck, what exactly is China's H-6N? The Shien H-6 lineage begins not in China, but in the Soviet Union of the 1950s, specifically with the Tupolev Design Bureau and a medium bomber designated the Tu-16. Andrei Tupolev's team created the Tu-16 as a swept-wing, twin-engine jet bomber capable of delivering nuclear weapons against targets in Western Europe. The aircraft first flew in 1952, the same year as the B-52, and entered Soviet service in 1954. It was a handsome machine by the aesthetics of the era: sleek fuselage, graceful swept wings, and two enormous McEwen AM-3 turbojet engines buried in the wing roots. The Soviets built approximately 1,500 examples and exported the design to allies, including the nascent People's Republic of China. In 1959, amid warming Sino-Soviet relations that would soon freeze over, the Soviet Union licensed Tu-16 production to China, transferring technical documentation and several airframes. The Chinese designated their version the H-6, and Xian Aircraft Corporation began production in 1968, just as the Cultural Revolution was tearing the country apart. That they managed to establish a production line under such conditions speaks to the political importance Beijing assigned to strategic aviation. That the H-6 remains in production today, 57 years later, speaks to something else entirely. The original H-6 was a near copy of the Tu-16, powered by Xian WP-8 turbojets, themselves derived from the Soviet McEwen engine. Early variants carried free-fall nuclear weapons and gravity bombs, with defensive armament consisting of 7 23mm cannons in fixed and turreted positions. Performance was adequate for the era: maximum speed of approximately 1,000 kilometers per hour, service ceiling of 13,000 meters, and combat radius around 3,000 kilometers. These figures made the H-6 a credible threat in the regional context of the 1970s and 1980s. But by global standards, even then, the aircraft was approaching obsolescence. Most nations would have moved on. China did not. Instead, they did something peculiar. They kept the basic airframe and updated everything else, iterating through so many variants that tracking them requires a spreadsheet. The H-6A, B, C, D, E, F, G, K, and N models each incorporate incremental improvements, some minor, some fundamental, until the latest versions share only a rough geometric resemblance to the original Tu-16. The H-6N specifically represents the most radical departure yet. The H-6N, publicly revealed in 2019 during a parade in Beijing, incorporates modifications that transform the aircraft's mission profile. The most visually striking change is the addition of a semi-recessed centerline hardpoint, capable of carrying a large externally mounted weapon, specifically the DF-21 or DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicle in an air-launched variant. This required significant structural reinforcement of the fuselage and modification of the internal fuel tankage, as the weapon is both heavy and aerodynamically disruptive. To compensate for reduced internal fuel capacity, the H-6N features a prominent dorsal refueling probe, making it the first H-6 variant capable of in-flight refueling. This extends its operational range significantly, pushing potential combat radius beyond 4,000 kilometers depending on payload and mission profile. The engines have been upgraded to WS-18 turbofans, which are reverse-engineered and improved versions of the Russian D-30KP-2 engine, the same engine family that powers the Il-76 transport and several other Russian aircraft. These engines provide better fuel efficiency and increased thrust compared to earlier turbojets, critical for hauling a multi-ton hypersonic weapon. But let us pause here and examine what this configuration actually means in practical terms, because the H-6N represents a strategic concept that warrants scrutiny. The aircraft is not a penetrating bomber in any traditional sense. Its radar cross-section is enormous by modern standards. Its electronic warfare suite, while undoubtedly improved over earlier variants, cannot compete with dedicated stealth platforms. And its defensive armament, reduced to tail guns or, in some variants, eliminated entirely, offers little protection against modern fighters or surface-to-air missiles. The H-6N is, fundamentally, a missile truck designed to stand off from defended airspace and launch weapons from a distance. The hypersonic weapon it carries is the real threat. The aircraft is merely the delivery mechanism, a flying launch rail that extends the missile's effective range by several thousand kilometers. This makes the H-6N a strategic asset not because of what it is, but because of what it carries, a distinction that matters greatly when assessing its role in Chinese military planning. The comparison between the B-52 and H-6N thus becomes less about aircraft performance and more about strategic philosophy and operational context. Both are subsonic, both are non-stealthy, and both rely on standoff weapons to prosecute targets in defended airspace. The B-52 is significantly larger, with greater range, payload capacity, and endurance. A B-52H can carry approximately 70,000 pounds of ordnance across a combat radius exceeding 4,500 nautical miles without refueling. The H-6N carries perhaps a third of that payload across roughly half the distance, though in-flight refueling changes the calculation substantially. The B-52 benefits from decades of systematic upgrades, deep institutional knowledge, and an industrial base capable of supporting complex modifications. The H-6N benefits from being newer. Individual airframes have far fewer flight hours, and from continuous production, meaning spare parts remain available and manufacturing expertise has not atrophied. There is also the matter of numbers, which in military affairs often matters more than quality. The United States Air Force operates 76 B-52H aircraft and has no plans to build more. The airframe is simply too old, the tooling long since scrapped. China operates an estimated 150 to 200 H-6 variants across all models, with production continuing. Even accounting for older variants that may be less capable, this numerical advantage is significant. In any conflict scenario, attrition becomes a factor. Losing 5 B-52s out of 76 is a 7% fleet reduction. Losing 10 H-6s out of 150 is a 6.7% reduction. But the absolute numbers tell a different story. The American force is irreplaceable in the short to medium term. The Chinese force can be replenished, at least until the production line eventually closes or transitions to a next-generation design. But numbers and payload capacity do not capture the full picture, because modern aerial warfare is as much about sensors, networks, and electronic warfare as it is about bombs and missiles. The B-52's recent upgrades emphasize network integration, the ability to receive targeting data from off-board sensors, coordinate with other platforms in real time, and serve as a node in a broader kill chain. The AN/APG-79 AESA radar, planned for integration under future modernization programs, would give the B-52 synthetic aperture radar mapping and ground-moving target indication capabilities far beyond its original design parameters. Link 16 data links connect the aircraft to Navy ships, AWACS platforms, fighters, and even satellite constellations, creating a common operational picture that transcends individual platform limitations. The B-52 becomes not just a bomber, but an information node, capable of launching weapons against targets it cannot even see, based on data provided by sensors hundreds of miles away. We know less about the H-6N's avionics and network integration, largely because China does not publish detailed technical specifications of its military systems. Open-source intelligence suggests the aircraft features modern glass cockpit displays, digital flight controls, and data link capabilities compatible with Chinese military networks. The exact capabilities of its radar, electronic warfare suite, and targeting systems remain subjects of speculation informed by analysis of Chinese defense industry developments and occasional official statements. What we do know is that the H-6N operates within a broader Chinese anti-access area denial strategy, working in conjunction with ground-based radars, satellites, and maritime patrol aircraft to create overlapping sensor coverage of the Western Pacific. The aircraft's role is to extend the reach of Chinese missile forces, particularly against high-value maritime targets such as aircraft carriers, which brings us to one of the more interesting aspects of this comparison: the weapons themselves. The B-52 can carry the AGM-86B air-launched cruise missile, a subsonic weapon with a range exceeding 1,000 kilometers, armed with either a conventional or nuclear warhead. It can carry the AGM-158 JSSM, a stealthy cruise missile with reduced radar cross-section and ranges between 370 and 1,000 kilometers, depending on variant. It is being tested with the AGM-183ARW, a hypersonic weapon intended to compete with Russian and Chinese developments, though this program has experienced delays and technical setbacks that suggest hypersonics remain harder than brochures imply. The B-52 can also carry the venerable Harpoon anti-ship missile, naval mines, and literally tons of unguided or precision-guided bombs for use in permissive environments. This flexibility is the aircraft's greatest asset. Mission planners can configure loadouts for virtually any scenario, from nuclear deterrence to close air support. The H-6N, conversely, appears optimized for a narrower mission set. Its primary weapon is likely an air-launched variant of the DF-21 or DF-17 missile system. The DF-21D, in its ground-launched form, is China's much-discussed carrier-killer anti-ship ballistic missile, designed to strike moving ships at sea from ranges exceeding 1,500 kilometers. An air-launched version extends this range further and complicates defensive planning, as the launch point is mobile and unpredictable. The DF-17 incorporates a hypersonic glide vehicle that maneuvers during re-entry, making interception extremely difficult with current missile defense systems. If the H-6N can reliably deliver these weapons from standoff ranges while refueling en route, it becomes a significant threat to surface action groups operating in the Western Pacific. But, and this is a substantial but, the entire kill chain depends on finding, tracking, and targeting a moving carrier group across thousands of square miles of ocean in an environment contested by American submarines, fighters, and electronic warfare assets. Carrying a hypersonic missile is impressive. Using it effectively against a maneuvering, defended target is another matter entirely. This leads us into the realm of operational reality versus theoretical capability, a distinction that separates propaganda from genuine military effectiveness. The B-52 has been tested in combat repeatedly: Vietnam, the Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq, and various smaller operations spanning 7 decades. Its crews have accumulated institutional knowledge under fire, its systems have been debugged in operational conditions, and its maintenance procedures have been refined through millions of flight hours. When a B-52 takes off on a mission, there is high confidence it will perform as expected, because it has performed thousands of times before. The H-6N has never been used in combat. Its hypersonic weapons have been tested, presumably on ranges under controlled conditions, but the integration of aircraft, weapon, targeting network, and operational environment has not been validated in the chaos of actual warfare. This does not mean it would fail. New systems can work exactly as designed, but history suggests first combat use often reveals problems that testing does not. There is also the matter of pilot training and operational proficiency. factors difficult to quantify but critically important. American B-52 crews train constantly with extensive simulator time, live flight training, and participation in large-scale exercises like Red Flag that simulate high-intensity conflict. They practice aerial refueling, low-altitude penetration, electronic warfare scenarios, and coordination with other services. Chinese H-6 crews presumably train as well, but the frequency, realism, and intensity of that training remain opaque to outside observers. Training is expensive, both in financial terms and in wear on airframes. Nations sometimes economize on flight hours, substituting simulator time or reducing training scope to extend airframe life or conserve budgets. Whether China prioritizes intensive training for H-6N crews or manages them more conservatively is unknown, but it matters greatly in determining actual operational capability. Let us turn now to the question of modernization potential, because both aircraft face decisions about their futures. The B-52 is approaching a remarkable milestone. The planned re-engining program, designated the Commercial Engine Replacement Program, will swap the 8 TF-33 turbofans for 8 Rolls-Royce F-130 engines derived from the BR-725 business jet engine. These new engines offer 25 to 30% better fuel efficiency, increased thrust, reduced maintenance requirements, and compliance with modern environmental regulations. Yes, even strategic bombers must now worry about emission standards, a development that would have baffled Cold War planners. The re-engining will extend the B-52's service life and reduce operating costs, making it viable into the 2050s as planned. Additional upgrades include new radars, upgraded avionics, and integration of new weapons as they enter service. The B-52 will outlive its designers, its original crews, and quite possibly the children of its original crews. The H-6N, being much newer in terms of design evolution, faces different choices. China is developing the H-20, a stealth bomber program that remains highly classified but is generally assessed to be similar in concept to the American B-2 or B-21, a flying wing design optimized for penetrating air defenses. When the H-20 enters service, current estimates suggest sometime in the late 2020s or early 2030s, it will presumably take over high-end penetration missions, relegating the H-6 family to secondary roles. However, given China's geographic position and strategic requirements, there will likely remain a need for mass and magazine depth, roles the H-6 fills adequately. Continued production of upgraded H-6 variants alongside H-20 deployment seems plausible, mirroring the American approach of pairing stealth and non-stealth bombers. Alternatively, China might pursue an entirely new design, or might simply run the H-6 line until airframes fatigue and attrition depletes the fleet. The decision depends on budgets, industrial capacity, strategic priorities, and technological maturation, variables that are difficult to predict even for domestic analysts, let alone foreign observers. What we can assess is the underlying strategic logic that makes these ancient designs relevant in 2025. Both nations maintain them because they fill a specific niche: long endurance, high payload platforms capable of delivering standoff weapons from outside defended airspace. In an era where stealth dominates public discussion, it is tempting to dismiss non-stealthy bombers as obsolete. This dismissal is premature. Stealth is not invisibility, it is reduced detection range. A stealth bomber might penetrate to within 50 or 100 kilometers of a target before being engaged. A non-stealthy bomber might be detected at 300 kilometers. If your weapon has a range of 1,000 kilometers, detection range becomes irrelevant. You launch from standoff distance regardless. In such scenarios, what matters is payload, endurance, and cost-effectiveness. The B-52 and H-6N excel at these metrics precisely because they are old and simple. Their engineering is understood, their systems debugged, and their operational procedures refined. There is a deeper irony at work here. one that reflects broader trends in military technology. Cutting-edge systems often promise revolutionary capabilities but deliver incremental improvements at exponentially increasing costs. The B-2 Spirit is magnificent, but at $2 billion per aircraft and availability rates that require climate-controlled hangars and constant maintenance, it is a boutique capability. The F-35 Lightning II is technologically remarkable, but its development cost hundreds of billions and its maintenance demands continue to exceed predictions. Meanwhile, the humble B-52 plods along, doing its job with systems that would seem archaic if they weren't so effective. This is not to argue against modernization or new capabilities. Stealth matters, advanced sensors matter, hypersonics matter, but rather to note that military effectiveness is a function of the entire force structure, not just the shiniest platforms. Old trucks still haul freight. The H-6N represents China's recognition of this same principle. Rather than wait for a clean-sheet next-generation bomber to emerge from development, they took an existing design, already old when they acquired it, and modified it incrementally to carry new weapons. The result is not aesthetically pleasing to aviation enthusiasts who prefer swept-wing elegance or stealthy angles, but it is operationally relevant and industrially achievable. China's defense industry has struggled with advanced engine development, high-performance fighter designs, and carrier-based aviation. The H-6 program succeeds precisely because it does not push technological boundaries. It is evolutionary, not revolutionary, and in military procurement, evolutionary programs tend to enter service on schedule, while revolutionary ones experience delays measured in decades. This brings us to a question that hovers over all discussions of aging military platforms: sustainability and industrial base considerations. The United States faces a peculiar problem. Boeing no longer manufactures large military aircraft in the quantities it once did. The production lines that built 744 B-52s are gone, the tooling scrapped or sold as scrap metal decades ago. If the United States wanted to build new B-52s today, even with original blueprints, the cost would be astronomical. Every piece of tooling would need to be recreated, suppliers requalified, and workers retrained. It is economically and practically infeasible. This makes the existing 76 airframes irreplaceable in any time frame relevant to current planning. China, conversely, maintains an active H-6 production line. While this ties up industrial capacity that could theoretically be used for more advanced designs, it also means they possess the institutional knowledge, tooling, and workforce to sustain and expand the fleet. This is a strategic asset in its own right, particularly given the uncertainties of next-generation programs. Let us consider the operational environments these aircraft might face in a high-intensity conflict, because that is ultimately how their value must be judged. In a conflict over Taiwan, the H-6N would operate from bases in mainland China, launching hypersonic or cruise missiles against American carrier groups, air bases in Japan or Guam, and high-value targets such as command nodes or logistics hubs. The aircraft would likely fly under escort from Chinese fighters, protected by layered air defenses over friendly territory, and attempt to launch weapons from maximum standoff range before retreating to base. American forces would attempt to intercept these bombers before weapon release, using carrier-based fighters, long-range interceptors from Japan, and potentially submarine-launched anti-aircraft weapons if such systems reach operational status. The H-6N's survival depends on remaining outside the engagement envelope of American fighters and surface-to-air missiles long enough to launch, a matter of minutes or even seconds in high-speed intercepts. The B-52 in the same scenario would likely operate from bases in Guam, Australia, or even the continental United States, with multiple aerial refuelings. It would launch cruise missiles or hypersonic weapons from standoff ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers, targeting Chinese air defenses, naval assets, and airfields. The aircraft would not attempt to penetrate Chinese airspace. That mission would fall to stealthy B-21s or F-35s. The B-52's job is to deliver tonnage from safe distances, overwhelming defenses through sheer volume of fire. Chinese forces would attempt to destroy these bombers on the ground through ballistic missile strikes on their bases, or intercept them using long-range fighters and surface-to-air missiles if they venture within range. Both sides face similar operational challenges, finding and targeting enemy platforms in a vast and contested operational area, surviving long enough to employ weapons, and achieving mission objectives before losses become unsustainable. This symmetry is striking. Despite their different origins, sizes, and capabilities, the B-52 and H-6N occupy analogous positions in their respective force structures. Both are legacy platforms adapted to carry modern weapons. Both rely on standoff tactics rather than penetration. Both would operate in coordination with other assets, fighters, tankers, intelligence platforms, to create effects greater than any single platform could achieve. And both would face existential threats from enemy air defenses and interceptors, making their survival a matter of tactics, timing, and luck as much as inherent capability. In a sense, they are mirror images. One Western, one Eastern, one enormous, one medium-sized, one ancient, one merely old, yet both serving the same strategic function. The question of effectiveness versus cost deserves examination. Operating a B-52H costs approximately $70,000 per flight hour, a figure that includes fuel, maintenance, crew salaries, and proportional overhead. This is expensive, but consider the alternatives. A B-2 Spirit costs approximately $130,000 per flight hour, nearly double. A B-52 sortie delivering 20 cruise missiles represents a substantial investment, but if those missiles destroy their targets, the cost-effectiveness calculation is favorable compared to alternatives like manned fighters, which carry fewer weapons and face greater risk. We lack reliable figures for H-6N operating costs, but Chinese labor costs and domestically produced engines likely make it cheaper to operate than the B-52, perhaps significantly so. If both platforms achieve similar mission effects, launching standoff weapons against high-value targets, then cost per mission becomes a relevant metric, one that favors simpler, older designs over newer, more complex ones. There is a philosophical dimension to this discussion that extends beyond pure military analysis. The continued operation of 70-year-old bombers speaks to the nature of technological progress and the gap between innovation and obsolescence. We live in an era where consumer electronics become outdated in years, where software platforms rise and fall within a decade, yet military platforms designed during the Korean War remain operational. This is partly due to the conservative nature of military procurement. Aircraft must be safe, reliable, and proven before entering service, but also reflects the physics of flight and warfare, which change slowly, if at all. An aircraft must still generate lift, overcome drag, and carry payload. A bomber must still deliver weapons to target and return safely. These fundamental requirements have not changed since the Wright brothers, and the engineering solutions that worked in 1952 still work today, provided they are maintained and updated appropriately. But perhaps the most important factor is strategic inertia and the institutional difficulty of replacing capabilities. Developing a new bomber requires decades, concept studies, prototyping, testing, production ramp-up, crew training, and operational integration. During this time, existing platforms must continue operating, which means maintaining them, which means investing in upgrades, which increases sunk costs and makes replacement less attractive. The B-52 was supposed to be replaced by the B-70 Valkyrie, which was canceled, then by the B-1, which was canceled, then revived, then relegated to conventional missions. Then by the B-2, which was cut from 132 aircraft to 21. Now the B-21 is supposed to replace everything, but it is still in development, and current plans assume it will supplement rather than replace the B-52. Each failed or truncated replacement program extends the B-52's service life, and each extension justifies further investment in upgrades. The result is an aircraft that has become institutionally immortal. China faces a similar dynamic with the H-6. They have attempted to develop indigenous bombers before. The Xian H-8 program of the 1990s was canceled, and the H-20 stealth bomber remains in development with an uncertain timeline. Meanwhile, the H-6 production line continues because it provides operational capability today, not theoretical capability tomorrow. The institutional momentum behind existing programs is powerful. Canceling them requires not just a replacement, but a replacement that is clearly superior, affordable, and achievable on a reasonable timeline. Given the technical challenges of stealth, advanced engines, and integrated avionics, the conservative choice is to continue iterating on proven designs while pursuing next-generation capabilities in parallel. This is not backwards thinking. It is risk management. One aspect often overlooked in platform comparisons is the human element, the crews who fly these machines, and the maintainers who keep them airworthy. A B-52 crew includes pilots who graduated from the Air Force Academy, or ROTC, underwent intensive flight training, and spent years accumulating experience on type. They are professionals who train constantly and operate within a well-established institutional framework. Maintenance personnel attend specialized schools, earn certifications, and work within a culture that emphasizes safety and reliability. This human infrastructure is as important as the aircraft itself. A perfectly good bomber is useless if no one knows how to fly or fix it. The United States Air Force has maintained this infrastructure for 70 years, across multiple generations of crews. That continuity is a strategic asset, often invisible in spreadsheet comparisons of thrust-to-weight ratios and radar cross-sections. We know less about Chinese bomber crews and maintainers, but some inferences are possible. The People's Liberation Army Air Force has expanded rapidly over the past 2 decades, transitioning from a force focused on homeland defense to one capable of regional power projection. This expansion required training thousands of new pilots and maintainers, establishing new bases, and developing operational doctrines for missions the force had never performed. The H-6 fleet, particularly newer variants like the H-6N, likely receives priority for personnel and resources, but the sheer scale of expansion raises questions about depth of experience. A pilot with 500 hours on type has less accumulated knowledge than one with 2,000 hours. A maintenance technician with 2 years' experience will miss problems a 10-year veteran would catch. These differences matter in high-stress operational environments where split-second decisions and intuitive troubleshooting determine success or failure. Let us return briefly to the weapons these platforms carry, because in modern warfare, the missile often matters more than the bomber. The AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile, first deployed in the 1980s, is a subsonic weapon that uses terrain-following radar and GPS guidance to navigate to targets. It is relatively easy to intercept with modern air defenses if detected, but its small radar cross-section and low-altitude flight profile make detection challenging. Launch a few dozen simultaneously from different directions, and even sophisticated defenses can be overwhelmed through sheer volume. The AGM-158 JASSM improves on this with reduced radar cross-section, more advanced guidance, and longer range. The extended range JASSM-ER exceeds 1,000 kilometers, allowing launch from deep in friendly airspace. These weapons turn the B-52 into a standoff platform that need never enter hostile airspace to strike deep targets. The Chinese weapons carried by the H-6N are less well documented, but appear to include several systems of concern to American planners. The YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship cruise missile, with speeds exceeding Mach 3 and ranges around 400 kilometers, threatens surface vessels with limited reaction time. The CJ-20 land attack cruise missile, similar in concept to the American Tomahawk, provides precision strike capability against fixed targets at ranges up to 2,000 kilometers. And the air-launched ballistic missiles, potentially DF-21 or DF-17 variants, represent a unique threat category. These weapons follow a ballistic or quasi-ballistic trajectory, reaching high altitudes before descending on targets at hypersonic speeds. Intercepting them requires either boost phase interception, shooting them down shortly after launch, which is tactically difficult, or terminal phase interception with advanced missile defense systems. Current American naval missile defense can engage some ballistic threats, but hypersonic glide vehicles that maneuver during re-entry present problems that existing systems struggle to address. This asymmetry in weapons technology is worth examining. American cruise missiles are highly capable, but they are largely subsonic, relying on stealth and numbers to achieve effects. Chinese missiles include supersonic and hypersonic options that trade stealth for speed, betting that velocity compresses defensive reaction time enough to achieve penetration. Which philosophy is superior depends on the specific scenario. Against dense, layered defenses, stealthy subsonic missiles may achieve better penetration rates. Against lighter or distracted defenses, supersonic speed may prove more effective. The reality is that both approaches have merit, and both nations are pursuing both types. The United States is developing hypersonic weapons while China continues producing stealthy cruise missiles. The platforms that carry them, whether B-52 or H-6N, matter less than the weapons themselves and the tactics employed. Tactical employment is where theory meets reality and where doctrine, training, and innovation separate effective forces from paper tigers. The B-52 benefits from decades of doctrinal evolution, refined through exercises and actual combat. American planners understand how to integrate bombers into joint operations, coordinating with fighters providing escort, tankers enabling extended range, AWACS providing situational awareness, and electronic warfare assets, jamming enemy sensors. They practice suppression of enemy air defenses, using decoys, jamming, and direct attack to create windows for bomber strikes. They rehearse timing and coordination so that multiple elements converge simultaneously, overwhelming defenses through synchronized action. This level of integration is difficult to achieve and requires extensive training and communications infrastructure. China has developed its own doctrines, drawing on foreign study, indigenous innovation, and lessons from conflicts it has observed but not participated in. The H-6N likely fits into a broader anti-access area denial strategy designed to deter American intervention in a Taiwan scenario by threatening high-value assets like aircraft carriers. Chinese doctrine presumably emphasizes massed missile strikes, leveraging both ground-launched and air-launched weapons to saturate defenses. The H-6N extends the range and flexibility of this approach, allowing launch from variable azimuths and complicating American defensive planning. But doctrine developed in peacetime and validated in exercises is not the same as doctrine proven in combat. The gap between the two has surprised many militaries throughout history, usually unpleasantly. Let us consider sustainability in a protracted conflict, a factor that rarely receives attention but determines who wins long wars. The B-52 fleet, though small, benefits from an enormous American industrial base and global logistics network. Parts can be manufactured, aircraft repaired, and weapons replenished from stocks located worldwide. The United States has refined these processes over decades of sustained operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Surge capacity exists to increase sortie rates significantly if required, though at the cost of accelerated wear. The H-6 fleet is larger numerically, but depends on a production line that might be vulnerable to attack, and a logistics system that has never been tested in high-intensity combat. China's industrial capacity is formidable, but converting industrial capacity into combat sustainability requires more than factories. It requires secure supply lines, trained personnel, and the organizational capability to sustain operations under stress. Attrition rates in a high-intensity conflict between peer or near-peer adversaries would likely be shockingly high compared to modern expectations. Both sides possess advanced air defenses, capable fighters, and anti-aircraft systems designed specifically to counter threats like bombers. Even with standoff tactics, some percentage of sorties will result in losses, mechanical failures, interceptions, missile defense successes, or simple bad luck. Losing 1 or 2 aircraft per week from a fleet of 76 means the force is depleted in less than a year. Losing 5 per week makes it unsustainable within months. China's larger fleet provides a buffer, but their aircraft are also more likely to face interception if operating in contested airspace near American carrier groups protected by layered defenses. Sustainability becomes a race between each side's ability to generate sorties, achieve mission effects, and accept losses without mission collapse. The nuclear dimension cannot be ignored, though it is rarely discussed in polite analytical circles. Both the B-52 and H-6 variants are capable of delivering nuclear weapons. The B-52H was designed from the outset as a strategic nuclear bomber, carrying gravity bombs or air-launched cruise missiles armed with thermonuclear warheads. The H-6 serves a similar role in Chinese nuclear strategy, providing an airborne leg of the nuclear triad alongside land-based missiles and ballistic missile submarines. In a conventional conflict, these nuclear-capable platforms would operate under strict control measures to avoid miscalculation or inadvertent escalation. But their mere presence in the battle space creates ambiguity. Is that bomber carrying conventional cruise missiles or nuclear-armed weapons? Does shooting it down constitute an attack on the enemy's nuclear forces, potentially triggering escalation? These questions complicate targeting decisions and create escalation risks that both sides must manage carefully. There is a strange beauty in the fact that these ancient machines remain relevant in an age of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and directed energy weapons. The B-52 and H-6N are relics of a different era, analog dinosaurs in a digital age, yet they persist because the fundamental missions they perform remain necessary. You still need to deliver large amounts of ordnance across great distances. You still need platforms with enough endurance to loiter, enough payload to matter, and enough simplicity to maintain. The newest technologies enhance these platforms: better radars, smarter weapons, more efficient engines. But the basic airframe designed with slide rules and wind tunnels still works. There is a lesson here about the pace of military innovation and the endurance of good enough solutions. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. And in military aviation, good enough has kept the B-52 flying for 70 years. As we approach the conclusion of this analysis, it is worth reflecting on what the continued operation of these bombers tells us about strategic planning and national priorities. The United States chooses to extend B-52 service life rather than accelerate next-generation bomber production, a decision driven by budgets, industrial capacity, and confidence that upgraded legacy platforms remain viable. China chooses to continue H-6 production and evolution rather than wait for the H-20, a decision driven by operational necessity and the pragmatic recognition that available capability beats future promises. Both nations are making rational calculations based on their specific circumstances, threat perceptions, and resource constraints. Neither approach is clearly superior in the abstract. Context determines effectiveness. The B-52 Stratofortress and Xian H-6N represent parallel evolution towards similar operational niches from radically different starting points. One is a giant, a relic of American industrial might at its zenith, kept flying through sheer determination and continuous modernization. The other is a derivative, adapted and improved over decades from a Soviet design, kept in production because it meets current needs adequately. Both will eventually be replaced by more modern platforms, the B-21 Raider, the H-20, or systems we cannot yet imagine. But that day remains years or decades away. Until then, these ancient bombers will continue to rumble down runways, lift improbable amounts of weight into the sky, and serve as instruments of national power for nations that have invested 70 years in keeping them relevant. In the end, the comparison is less about which aircraft is superior and more about what the continued relevance of both tells us about modern warfare. Technology matters, but so does doctrine, training, industrial capacity, and strategic integration. The most advanced platform means little if it cannot be sustained, if crews cannot employ it effectively, or if the broader force structure does not support its operations. Both the B-52 and H-6N succeed not because they are technological marvels. They are not, but because they fit within coherent strategies, leverage industrial bases capable of sustaining them, and perform missions their respective nations need performed. They are, in their own ways, perfectly adequate tools for the strategic environments they inhabit. And in military affairs, adequate tools that exist today will always trump perfect tools that might exist tomorrow. The story of these bombers is ultimately a story about persistence, adaptation, and the long shadow cast by Cold War engineering. They are monuments to an era when nations built things expecting them to last, when over-engineering was a virtue rather than a cost liability, and when the pace of technological change allowed designs to mature over decades rather than becoming obsolete within years. We will likely never see their like again, not because we cannot build aircraft with similar performance, but because the strategic, industrial, and budgetary conditions that created them no longer exist. They are the last of their kind, and when the final B-52 lands for the last time, sometime around 2050, and when the last H-6 is retired, whenever that may be, an era will truly end. Until then, they fly on, ancient giants in a world that has moved past them, yet somehow still needs exactly what they offer: steady, reliable, unglamorous delivery of violence across distances that matter. That is their legacy, and it is a strangely enduring one.